The Mirror on Fleet Street. How feelings reveal beliefs, and beliefs shape what you experience. The fog that morning didn't drift so much as it hovered, thick and opinionated, as if London itself had decided to keep its thoughts private. Horse hooves struck wet cobbles with a steady clop, carriage wheels hissed through puddles, and somewhere down the street a bell gave a tired chime that sounded older than the buildings. On Fleet Street, a narrow shop with a painted sign, Heart and Heart, ledgers and letters glowed with lamplight behind the window, a modest warmth fighting the gray. Inside, Henry Hart was already at his desk, cuffs rolled, hair combed as precisely as his columns of numbers. Henry believed in order the way a sailor believes in a compass. He believed a man's worth could be measured by what he produced, by what he could guarantee, by what he could control. He would never have admitted that word control because it sounded unrefined, but he kept it tucked beneath his waistcoat like a pocket watch. If he listened carefully, he could hear it ticking. The door opened with a bell's bright insistence. "Morning," said Mara Hart, stepping in and closing the door behind her, shaking off rain from her cloak. She was Henry's younger sister by 2 years, and she carried herself like someone who expected the world to cooperate not because she demanded it, but because she assumed it could. Henry looked up. "You're late." Mara's eyebrows lifted. "I'm precisely when I arrived." "That," Henry said, tapping his ledger with a finger, "is not how time works." Mara smiled, unbothered, and moved toward the small kettle by the stove. "Tea? I've already had some." "Then more tea," she said, as if it were a kindness the universe owed him. Henry watched her for a moment, and something in him tightened, familiar as a shirt collar. Mara had a way of moving through life with ease that made his efforts feel loud. He told himself it was irresponsible. He told himself it was naive. But the truth he didn't like was that it made him feel smaller. A knock came at the door again, sharp and official, and before Henry could respond, the door opened, and a man in a dark coat stepped inside with the posture of someone trained to deliver unpleasantness with dignity. "Mr. Hart," he said, "a message from the magistrate's office." Henry rose at once. "Yes?" The man handed over an envelope sealed with red wax. "Regarding the matter of the building next to yours." He hesitated, then added, "There has been an incident, a dispute. You'll want to read it directly." The man left, the bell chiming behind him like a warning disguised as manners. Henry broke the seal with a careful thumb. His eyes moved quickly. Then his face, which usually held steady like stone, shifted just slightly into something sharper. "What is it?" Mara asked, setting a cup down. Henry held the paper up, as if it might bite. "They're saying the adjoining property owner claims our back wall encroaches by 6 inches. Mara blinked. 6 inches. 6 inches? Henry repeated, and now his voice held heat. As if we... He stopped himself, but not before his jaw tightened. "This shop has been here 20 years. Father." His throat clicked. "Father built this arrangement himself." Mara leaned closer to read the lines. "There's to be a review, a survey." "A review?" Henry said, as if the word were a personal insult. "And until it's settled, there may be restrictions on the back storage access." Mara's gaze lifted from the page to his face. "You look like you want to fight someone." "I want to correct something that is wrong." "That's a nicer way to say fight," she said gently. Henry paced once, a short line between desk and shelves. "If they restrict our storage, it disrupts deliveries. If deliveries are disrupted, clients notice. If clients notice, they might think we're incompetent," Mara finished softly. Henry stopped. "Yes." There was a pause where the fog outside seemed to press closer to the glass. Mara sipped her tea. "So the fear is not the 6 inches?" Henry stared at her. "Fear?" Mara nodded toward him, not unkindly. "Your face is shouting. That's usually not about measuring tape." Henry let out a short breath, almost a scoff, but it lacked conviction. "I'm not afraid. I'm irritated." Mara's eyes warmed. Irritation is fear wearing a smarter hat. Henry didn't answer, because some part of him recognized her words as true, and that recognition felt like being caught in the act of something he hadn't known he was doing. Mara set her cup down carefully. "We're going to the site." "We are?" "Yes." She pulled her gloves on. "We'll meet the neighbor, hear what's being claimed, and," she hesitated, searching for the right phrasing, and listen to what happens inside us while it happens outside. Henry frowned. We have work. We have life, Mara corrected. And it's knocking. Henry wanted to argue, but the paper in his hand seemed heavy with consequence. He nodded once, sharp. Fine. They stepped back into the street, the fog swallowing them in a moment, and for a short walk they moved in silence. Henry's mind ran ahead, constructing scenarios like a man building barricades. Mara, beside him, looked at the shop fronts and puddles as if they were simply part of the morning. At the adjoining building, a printing shop with stacks of damp paper near the doorway, stood Mr. Ashdown, the owner, a broad-shouldered man with ink-stained fingers and a permanent squint that made him look like he expected disappointment to arrive early. Mr. Hart, Ashdown said. Miss Hart. Henry's spine stiffened. Mr. Ashdown. Ashdown nodded toward the narrow alley between buildings. My clerk noticed the back wall. It's pushing over. We can't set our press properly. We've lost time. And time, he spread his hands, is money. Henry felt his chest tighten at that phrase, because it struck a tender place. He answered quickly, We're not pushing anything. That wall has been there for 20 years, Ashdown said. So you say, but my deed says otherwise. Henry's mouth went dry. He wanted to argue on principle, on history, on fairness. He wanted to say, How dare you? The feeling in him rose like boiling water. It wasn't only annoyance. It was something more raw fear. Yes. But also the sting of being accused. Mara's hand touched his sleeve light, grounding. May we see the deed? She asked Ashdown. Ashdown looked surprised by her tone, then reached into his coat and produced folded papers. Mara took them and scanned, then handed them to Henry. Henry read, his eyes narrowing. There it was, described in that crisp legal language. Boundaries, angles, measurements. If it was accurate, their wall was indeed questionable. His stomach sank. He looked up, and Ashdown's expression didn't soften. I'm not trying to ruin you, Ashdown said. I'm trying to run my business. Henry heard those words and felt a flare of anger anyway. The flare didn't make sense if the other man's intent was reasonable. But Henry wasn't reacting to reason. He was reacting to what this threatened. Mara tilted her head slightly. Mr. Ashdown, she said, if it turns out the wall is off, what do you want? Ashdown blinked. I want the space. I want the boundary respected. And if it turns out it's not off? Then I want an apology, Ashdown said, blunt. For the waste of my time. Henry felt heat crawl up his neck. Apology meant guilt. Guilt meant weakness. Weakness meant losing ground in a world that did not forgive it. Mara watched Henry's face as if she could see the invisible gears turning. Henry, she murmured, low enough that Ashdown couldn't hear. What are you feeling right now? Henry's eyes snapped to her. Do not start. I'm asking, Mara said, calm, because the feeling is the message. Henry wanted to reject that entire idea. He wanted to say, the message was the deed, the survey, the magistrate's letter. But even as he stood there, he could tell the feeling inside him was not formed from paper and ink. It was formed from something older, something already living in him. He swallowed. I feel threatened. Mara's expression softened. By what, exactly? Henry's mouth opened, then closed. A carriage passed behind them, wheels splashing dirty water, and the sound felt like punctuation. By losing, Henry admitted, and the word tasted sour. Mara nodded, as if he'd said something ordinary. And what would losing mean? Henry looked at the brick wall between buildings. He saw more than brick. He saw a reputation. He saw stability. He saw the thin line between safety and scrambling. It would mean, he said slowly, that we're not secure. That one mistake can undo everything. Mara's eyes held steady on him. That's the belief, she said. Henry scowled, defensive. It's a fact. Mara shook her head gently. It's a thought, and your body's telling you how it feels to hold it. Henry's hands curled at his sides. So you want me to feel... what? Cheerful while we get sued? Mara smiled faintly. I want you to notice that your feeling is not proof the world is dangerous. She glanced at Ashdown, who was watching them with impatience. It's proof you believe it is. Henry's irritation spiked again, because that suggestion threatened his favorite habit, making the outside responsible for the inside. It was far easier to say, "This man is doing this to me," than to admit, "Something in me is doing this to me." Ashdown cleared his throat. "So?" Mara turned to him. "We'll cooperate with the survey," she said. "And in the meantime, we won't obstruct your work. If you need temporary access adjustments, we'll discuss them." Ashdown's eyes narrowed. That's it for now," Mara said. "We'll let the facts settle." Ashdown looked to Henry, expecting resistance. Henry felt it rising, an automatic impulse to push back, to reclaim ground. His mouth even formed the start of a retort. Then he noticed the feeling again, like a tug under the ribs. He noticed it was the same tug he'd felt as a boy when Father's voice sharpened. "Don't embarrass me. Don't fail. Don't be careless." And in that moment, Henry saw something he hadn't been willing to see. He wasn't fighting Ashdown over a wall. He was fighting his own old fear of being not enough. Henry took a breath. "We'll cooperate," he said, and the words came out rough but real. Ashdown blinked, then nodded once, wary. "Fine." He turned back into his shop. When they walked away, Henry felt strangely hollow. Not relieved, not victorious. Hollow. Like he'd set down a heavy bag, and now his arms didn't know what to do. Mara didn't speak immediately. She let the moment breathe, as if she respected that something had moved inside him. Finally, she said, "Do you see it?" Henry stared ahead at the fog. "I see that he might be right." Mara shook her head. "Not that. I mean, do you see what your reaction was pointing to?" Henry hesitated. "I reacted." "Yes," Mara said, almost smiling. "And your reaction wasn't caused by 6 inches. Henry's jaw tightened again, habit. But he was starting to recognize the habit as a habit. It was caused by the belief that if something goes wrong, I'm unsafe. Mara's eyes brightened. "There." Henry let out a slow breath. "So what do I do? Pretend I'm not unsafe?" Mara walked a little slower, matching his pace. "Not pretend," she said. "Adjust." "Adjust what? The wall?" Mara tapped her chest lightly with 2 fingers. The thing that made the wall feel like a cliff. Henry looked at her. "And if I don't?" Mara's voice stayed gentle. "Then you'll keep attracting cliffs." Henry scoffed, but weaker than before. "You make it sound like my thoughts control the city." "No," Mara said. "But your thoughts control what the city feels like, and what you expect from it, and what you keep noticing, and what kinds of situations keep returning." Henry wanted to argue. He wanted to demand proof. Yet, as they passed a baker's stall, the smell of warm bread reached him, and he realized his mind had been so busy bracing for threat that he hadn't even noticed beauty until it forced itself into him. They returned to Heart, and the day resumed clients, letters, numbers. But Henry found that his attention kept circling back to the moment in the alley, like a tongue touching a sore tooth. That afternoon, a young clerk named Simon arrived with a stack of invoices. He was new, eager, and he held the papers as if they were precious. "Mr. Hart," Simon said, "I completed the totals as you instructed." Henry took the stack and glanced. He saw immediately that one column was off. It wasn't a disaster, but it was wrong. His chest tightened again, and the same heat began to rise. "Simon," he said, voice sharpening, "this is incorrect." Simon's face went pale. "Aye, sir. I checked twice." "Then you checked incorrectly," Henry snapped. Simon's eyes flickered downward. "I'm sorry. I'll redo it." Henry felt a familiar satisfaction in the snap, like striking a match in darkness. It made him feel briefly powerful, briefly safe. Then he caught Mara watching from the doorway of the back room, her expression quiet. Henry's satisfaction turned to discomfort, and that discomfort was a sign he couldn't ignore now. Mara said nothing. She didn't correct him. She didn't scold. She simply looked at him, the way one looks at a mirror when it reflects something unexpected. Simon hurried to a side table, hands shaking as he rearranged papers. Henry stood still, papers in hand, and the feeling in him worsened, not because of the totals, but because he recognized what he'd done. He'd made the outside responsible again. He'd pushed his fear into someone else's chest. Mara came closer and spoke softly. "What are you feeling?" Henry's throat tightened. Annoyed. Mara raised an eyebrow. Henry swallowed. "Fine, I'm worried." Mara nodded. "About what?" Henry looked at Simon, the boy's trembling hands. "If errors happen, clients leave." "And if clients leave?" Mara prompted. Henry's voice dropped. "We fail." "And if you fail?" Mara asked. And she asked it kindly, which made it harder. Henry felt something twist in him. Then, "I'm not worthy." Mara's gaze held his. "There," she whispered. "That's the belief." Henry stared at the invoices. A part of him wanted to deny it, to declare it dramatic. But he couldn't. The feeling had already told the truth. The feeling was not a punishment. It was a signal like pain that says, something here needs attention. He watched Simon struggle and realized another truth. His own fear was costing him more than any column error ever could. Henry walked to Simon's table. Simon flinched slightly, expecting more sharpness. Henry inhaled. His old habit urged him to maintain authority through hardness. Another possibility unfamiliar stood beside it. Authority through steadiness. "Simon," Henry said. "Slower, show me where you calculated the subtotal." Simon blinked, confused by the tone. "Here, sir." They went through it together. The error was simple. A transposed number. Simon corrected it quickly, relief flooding his face. "I apologize," Henry said, and the words startled even him. "My reaction was unnecessary." Simon's eyes widened. "No, sir." "It was," Henry insisted, and his voice was not harsh now. "I want accuracy, but I don't want fear in this office." Simon nodded, swallowing. "Yes, sir." When Simon left the table, Mara leaned closer. "How do you feel now?" Henry paused, listening inward. The heat had cooled. His chest felt less tight. "Better," he admitted. Mara smiled, satisfied. "Because you shifted the belief." Henry frowned. "I shifted something." Mara laughed softly. "That's enough for today." But the day did not let him stop there. As dusk thickened, a client arrived unannounced, Mrs. Pembroke, a sharp-eyed widow with a reputation for precision and dissatisfaction. She stepped into the shop as if she owned it, her gloved hand holding a letter. "Mr. Hart," she said, "I received word that your storage access may be restricted." Henry felt his stomach drop. Word travels fast, he thought. Too fast. He saw the threat again. Reputation, security, worth. Mrs. Pembroke continued, "If your operations are unstable, I must consider other arrangements. My finances require steadiness." There it was, the external circumstance pressing on his internal bruise. Henry felt the impulse to defend himself, to promise, to over-explain, to grasp for a rock in the river. He almost did. His mouth opened. Then he remembered the alley. He remembered Simon's hands. He remembered the feeling itself as information, not as truth about the world. He closed his mouth and took one slow breath. Mara stood behind the counter, silent, watching. Henry asked himself, quickly, privately, what belief is being exposed right now? The answer came immediately. If she leaves, I am unsafe. If she leaves, I am not worthy. He felt how terrible those beliefs felt, and he recognized that feeling as a clear signal. Not a verdict, a signal. Henry chose another thought, not a grand one, just a better feeling one. My worth is not dependent on one client. My stability is inside me first. The feeling shifted a fraction, like a window opened in a stuffy room. He met Mrs. Pembroke's gaze. "There is a boundary review," he said calmly. "It is being handled officially. In the meantime, our service to you remains steady. If you have any concerns, you may bring them directly to me and I will address them." Mrs. Pembroke studied him, looking for cracks. Henry felt the urge to prove, but he stayed with the steadier thought. He felt his feet on the floor. He felt his breath. He felt his own presence as something solid. Mrs. Pembroke's posture softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Very well," she said. "I will watch how it unfolds." "As you should," Henry replied, and to his surprise he meant it without fear. When she left, the bell chimed again, but this time it sounded less like a warning and more like a simple closing of a chapter. Mara exhaled quietly, as if she'd been holding her breath. That she said, was different. Henry's shoulders lowered. I felt the fear. And you didn't obey it, Mara said. Henry frowned, considering. It still exists. Mara nodded. Of course. But now it's a lantern, not a leash. Henry leaned on the counter, suddenly tired in a deep way. Is this what you do all day? He asked. Listen to feelings and adjust thoughts? Mara smiled. Not all day. Sometimes I forget. Then life reminds me. Henry let out a small, humorless laugh. Life is relentless. Life is helpful, Mara corrected. It shows you what you believe, because what you believe is what you keep meeting. Henry looked toward the back wall, unseen from the shop front. So Ashdown showed me my belief. Mara nodded. And Simon showed you your belief. And Mrs. Pembroke, Henry said, showed me my belief. Mara's eyes were kind. Yes. Henry stared at the lamplight pooling on the wooden floor, and something loosened inside him, a long-held tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. He thought of how he'd lived, braced, prepared, ready to correct, ready to defend. He thought of Mara, moving through the same London streets, under the same fog, yet somehow not crushed by it. They lived in the same city, in the same family, under the same pressures, yet their inner weather was different. Mirror, he realized. That was the true mirror. Not Mara copying him, not him copying Mara, but the world reflecting back what each carried inside. Henry said quietly, So, if I change what I carry? Mara finished. You change what you meet. Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion now, but in focus. And if I don't? Mara's voice stayed gentle. Then you keep meeting it until you do. A week passed. The surveyor arrived, measured carefully, and declared that the boundary line was ambiguous due to an older deed's faded ink and a shifted marker stone. The magistrate ordered a compromise. Half the disputed space to be shared via a small structural adjustment, costs divided. Henry read the ruling twice. It wasn't a win. It wasn't a loss. It was workable. In the old Henry, this would have felt like failure, because he would have believed anything less than full control was danger. He felt the old irritation try to rise anyway. Then he listened to it, like listening to a child cry in the night. He didn't shame it. He didn't indulge it. He simply recognized what it meant, an old belief asking for attention. He chose a better feeling thought. This outcome does not define me. Cooperation is not weakness. Adjustment is not collapse. The feeling eased. Not instantly, not completely, but enough. He met Ashdown the next morning at the back alley, where workers were preparing to shift a section of brick. Ashdown looked wary. So, he said, we share the burden. Henry nodded. We do. Ashdown's lips pressed together. I suppose that's fair. Henry surprised himself by saying, I was angry. Not because of you, because I thought being wrong meant being unsafe. Ashdown blinked, thrown off by the honesty. Well, he said gruffly, being wrong is unpleasant. Henry smiled faintly. Yes, but unpleasant isn't the same as dangerous. Ashdown studied him for a moment, then let out a breath that might have been a laugh. You're an odd man, Hart. I'm learning, Henry said. As the workers began their careful chiseling, Henry watched the brick dust fall like fine gray snow. He felt something in him settle. The wall was being adjusted in the physical world, yes. But more importantly, the wall inside him was being adjusted too, the old boundary he'd drawn around his worth, the narrow space he'd allowed himself to occupy. Only safe if perfect, only worthy if praised, only stable if in control. He turned to Mara, who stood nearby with her cloak pulled tight against the chill. You were right, he said. Mara's eyes sparkled. About which part? Henry huffed. Don't get smug. Mara laughed. Too late. Henry looked at her, then at the fog lifting slightly as the morning brightened. My feelings, he said slowly, are not the proof that something is wrong out there. Mara nodded. They're the proof that something is wrong in here, Henry continued, tapping his chest. In what I'm holding is true. Mara's voice was soft, satisfied. And when you notice it, I can choose a better belief, Henry said, and the words felt both strange and empowering. A better thought. And my feeling changes. And when your feeling changes, Mara added, your vibration changes. Henry took that in. He watched Ashdown speak to a worker, and noticed that the man's face looked less hostile now, less like a rival and more like another human trying to run a life. Henry wondered, briefly, how much of Ashdown's harshness had been his own vibration reflected back. The thought wasn't blame. It was responsibility. Henry said quietly, so even the unwanted things. Mara nodded. They're valuable. They show you what you've been offering. Henry inhaled, the air cold and clean for a moment. Then I've been offering fear. Mara's hand squeezed his arm. And now you're offering awareness. Henry watched the wall shift, brick by brick, and felt something else rise in him, small but bright. Not relief dependent on outcome, but a steadier confidence that came from knowing he could handle his inner world regardless of the outer one. The city would keep being the city. Fog would come and go. People would accuse, misunderstand, demand, worry, leave, arrive. The river would keep flowing, but Henry didn't have to cling to every rock anymore. He could feel the tug of fear and recognize it as a signal. Look here, adjust here, choose again. And as he stood there, in the narrow alley of Fleet Street, with dust on the air and workmen humming an off-key tune, Henry Hart felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not control, peace.